Almost 35 years ago, about half my lifetime, in the middle of my ministry with the congregation in Bloomington, Indiana, I realized that I needed to learn how to pray. Now, you may think that's something I should have picked up a little earlier, perhaps while I was in divinity school, if not before. And you wouldn't be wrong, but it's never too late to learn. And if you remember nothing else from this sermon, I hope you'll remember that it's never too late to begin a spiritual practice. The time is always right to learn. Psychologists say that all learning involves a cycle which passes through 4 stages, from a state of unconscious incompetence, what we sometimes call blissful ignorance, through a time of conscious incompetence, when we realize that we lack something, when we bump up against our own limitations, to a stage of conscious competence. As long as we concentrate and stay really focused, we can do it. And then finally to a state of a condition of unconscious competence, where what we have learned becomes, as they say, second nature. And that's true of learning to speak a language, or to ski, or to ride a bike, or to bake bread, or to dance, or to pray. And at that time, I was just emerging from a state of unconscious incompetence into a painfully conscious sense of my incompetence when it came to prayer. Now, for the purposes of this sermon, I'm making a distinction between 2 basic kinds of prayer called common prayer and contemplative prayer. Common prayer is public, liturgically spoken prayer as represented classically, and I must say beautifully, in the Anglican Book of Common Prayer, one of the great literary treasures of the English language. Contemplative prayer, on the other hand, is more like what most people think of as meditation, a quiet, often silent form of personal reflection and intimate spiritual communion. I felt consciously incompetent in both kinds of prayer, but it was this contemplative form that interested me most and that I wanted to learn, and that's what I'll be talking about in this sermon. I did some research and found that the best place to study contemplative prayer at that time was the Shalem Institute in Washington, D.C. So I signed up for a 2-year certificate program with several week-long residential sessions in D.C. and intensive homework assignments back in Indiana. Shalem was founded in the late 1970s by Tilden Edwards, an Episcopal priest who had been deeply impressed and influenced by his immersion in Tibetan Buddhist meditation practice during a sabbatical year in his ministry. And when he returned from that experience, he was determined to discover the equally transformative but largely forgotten resources of contemplative prayer within his own Christian tradition. So along with the psychiatrist Gerald May, the Roman Catholic nun and spiritual director Rosemary Doherty, a Methodist laywoman named Marlene Meyer, and several others, Edwards formed the group called Shalem. And the word Shalem, of course, comes from that Hebrew root which means whole, not just peace, but wholeness and integrity. I applied and was accepted into the program, so I drove all the way from Indiana to DC, where I joined about 20 other people from all around the country for my first week-long residential class. I was not at all sure what to expect, and what I found was something extraordinarily simple, but at the same time extremely challenging. After the usual introductions and orientation to the program, we began our work together by breathing. Specifically, we began by counting our breaths. The instructions were simply to breathe naturally without trying to control or manipulate or improve our breathing in any way, for example, by breathing more deeply or more slowly or more rapidly or through this nostril or that. This was not a breathing exercise. such as an opera singer or an athlete might undertake. This was an awareness exercise, which just happened to use the naturally occurring cycle of the breath as its ground and guide to awareness. The counting was just something to assist our attentiveness to the breathing process. We were invited simply to attend gently to the actual rhythm of inhalation and exhalation, whatever that might be, and then to simply count. At each exhalation, we would silently say to ourselves, 1, 2, etc., and all up to 10, and then we would start over. And during this time, we were told not to suppress or control our thoughts in any way, other than to silently say the number when we exhaled. No other thoughts were required, but neither were any thoughts forbidden. We were simply to allow whatever thoughts might arise to do so. And then, when the rhythm of breathing required it, to just simply return to the counting. Sounds easy, right? Well, if you could have listened to a transcript of my internal mental and emotional process at the time, it might have sounded something like this. One. That was easy. Felt good. I get this. 2. Okay. So far, so good. 3. Okay, I got this. 4. There's got to be more to this. I'm feeling sort of bored. Just relax, Bruce, an interior voice says. Who was that? Okay, relaxing. Where was I? 4? 4. 5. Or was that? Oh, never mind. Breathing in. 6. Definitely 6. I sure hope it gets more interesting than this. I'm paying good money to be here. It's a pretty nice place, though. Nice people. Nice drive out here. A wordless image of the Maryland countryside scrolls silently past before my mind's eye. I'm remembering the visit I paid the day before to the Antietam National Battleground, the site of the single bloodiest day in American military history, bar none, including World War II. I'm thinking that was in what, 1863? Now in 1990, it was an absolutely beautiful stretch of bucolic countryside, peaceful, green. What the? Startled, I asked where am I? Where was I? 6? 7? Oh, well, I guess I'm busted. I have to start over. 1. Apply the mental clamps. 2. No more stray thoughts. I wonder if anyone's gotten to 10 yet. Probably Eileen. She seemed pretty confident. Eileen or Elaine? Maybe it's Irene. Where was I? Damn. 1, 2, and so it went for 10 or 15 minutes. I'm not sure I ever reached 10. Of course, that wasn't the point. It wasn't a contest or a race, but this exercise did succeed in revealing what the Buddhists would call my monkey mind, the thoughts jumping around in the branching synaptic jungle of my brain, completely beyond my control. I was confirmed in my own conscious incompetence. I realized how little control I had over this intimate inward stream of awareness that I thought of as myself. It was quite humbling. As I said, it was simple, but it was far from easy. Now, over the course of the week and beyond, I gradually, very gradually, began to get it, eventually arriving at a state of conscious competence, not controlling my thoughts, but allowing them to arise and dissipate without carrying me away along with them. My teachers like to use the metaphor of spacious awareness, of openness. Thoughts are like clouds in the sky, they would say, but awareness is the open sky itself. The counting was like training wheels on a bicycle. Eventually, we were invited to no longer count, but simply to be aware of the actual sensation of breathing itself. Naked, content-free awareness, what the Buddhists call vipassana, awareness or mindfulness. In the favored language of Shalem, this state of mind was called simple, open presence. And that simple, open presence is contemplative prayer. The disposition of continually renewed immediacy prior to any images or words. This disposition is the fundamental spiritual posture of contemplative prayer. Later, we would learn to gradually or to gently insert, instead of a number, a short word or a phrase or a syllable into the breath stream, what in the Hindu tradition is called a mantram. Om is the most well-known. Amen works fine. Yeshua for those followers of Jesus, or love, or one, the word one. Just a little something to bring the attention back. Still later, we learned simple chants like the one we shared this morning in our opening hymn, or bodily postures and movements, as well as visualization exercises. But all of these techniques, these methods, were examples of what are called prayer forms. And all of those forms are simply tools to prevent one's consciousness from being hijacked away from the condition, our inherent human condition of simple, open presence. We've closed that off. We've guarded ourselves from experiencing that. But simple, open presence is the natural human condition, according to the psychiatrist Gerald May. He used to call these prayer forms just a little something to do when we find our attention being kidnapped away from this natural condition of simple open presence. But through all of this, the fundamental distinction was made and maintained between prayer forms and prayer itself, between saying your prayers or performing prayer on the one hand, and simply being prayerful, living in a contemplative posture on the other hand. And all of this begins with and remains with the mystery of breath, the delicate practice of resting in the breath, of allowing oneself to breathe, as the great German medieval mystic and musician Hildegard of Bingen put it. She referred to herself as a feather on the breath of God. So contemplative prayer finds its home in the breath, in awareness of the breath. Now, we don't need to pay attention to our breathing, of course. It happens automatically. Breathing occurs at that very interesting boundary between conscious and unconscious process, which makes it a particularly good focus for meditation. And our breath also serves as a bridge or interface between our inner world and the outer world. The world's indigenous wisdom traditions remember this. The Lakota spiritual elder John Fire Lamedeer, for example, says, listen to the air. You can hear it, feel it, smell it, taste it. Waniya Wakan, the holy air, which renews all by its breath. Waniya Wakan, spirit, life, breath, renewal. It means all of that. Waniya, we sit together, we're not touching, but something is here. We feel it between us as a presence. A good way to start thinking about nature, he says, is to talk about it, rather talk to it. Talk to the rivers, to the lakes, to the winds, as to our relatives. The Diné, Navajo people of the American Southwest, have an incredibly beautiful and complex and sophisticated understanding of the relationship between what they call the holy wind, and the nilch we season, which is that portion of the wind which enters into us and circulates within our cells. Even the whorls on our fingertips and on our hair for the Navajo are manifestations of this holy wind, and the inner. And so we participate in this. It's not like we're self-enclosed little subjectivities, but the holy wind enters into us. We participate in that process. I'm thinking of a member of my congregation back in Norwich, Vermont, a beautiful man named Phil Kern, who died this last year. But he was a retired geologist, and I remember visiting him and his wife once at their home out in the woods in New Hampshire, and he said, "Bruce, I want to show you my spiritual practice." And we sat down in the woods. He sat down next to a big fern about this high. He sat cross-legged in front of the fern, and he kind of leaned into it a little bit, and he just breathed, and then he would breathe out. And as he explained, he didn't need to explain, but he explained that what he was breathing out, the carbon dioxide, the plant was breathing in, and the plant was exhaling oxygen, and he was breathing that in. And they sat together just in this intimate communion between man and fern for 5-10 minutes, just to show me what he was doing. It's beautiful demonstration of this truth that the Diné people also understand. The close connection between breath and life and spirit is also expressed in the very earliest language of the biblical tradition. The Hebrew word ruach does mean breath, wind, and spirit. All three of those are absolutely legitimate translations of that word. So the verse in Genesis that speaks of God's ruach hovering over the water, the face of the deep, can be validly translated as breath, wind, or spirit. You don't have to choose between them. All those connotations are there. Likewise, when the Creator breathes into the earth creature Adam, and that word, of course, is related to the word for ground, Adamah, the earth itself. So the Creator breathes into the earth creature, and it becomes a living soul, a neshama, a breath-infused, animated earthling. And this, just to remind you, this is entirely naturalistic imagery. There's nothing supernatural about this story at all, or this language. It's about wind, breath, as spirit. The New Testament preserves a bit of this intimate association between breath and spirit in the strange and fascinating little story in the Gospel according to John of the resurrected Jesus returning to his disciples and breathing on them. I'll quote the text here: "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." And when he said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." I've always been intrigued by the fact that the 16th century Unitarian theologian Michael Servetus was a Renaissance man. He was, among other things, a physician, and he actually accurately described the pulmonary circulation of the blood through the lungs earlier than William Harvey, the English physician who's usually credited with that discovery, at least 50 years earlier. Servetus had described it in a footnote to a theological argument that he was making in a book about the doctrine of the Trinity. It's not that he rejected that language entirely, but he was trying to understand what it meant and interpret it. And he said, well, it's like the relationship between those three figures is like the way that the blood goes out into the lungs and back into the heart. And, he was using it as a metaphor or an analogy. And he too then saw in the respiratory process, not just a metaphor, but the actual experience of inspiration. He writes, in the inhalation and exhalation, there is an energy and the lively divine spirit, since he, that is God, through his spirit, supports the breath of life, giving courage to the people who are in the earth and spirit to those who walk on it. So spirit, breath, and wind, all mysterious, elusive, intangible, but also entirely natural processes, not necessarily supernatural. One of the first memorial services I did in that church back in Bloomington was for a man named Burt Langdon. He was a composer and a retired professor of music at Indiana University, one of the best music programs in the country, actually. And I spent a lot of time visiting with Burt over the last year of his illness and listening as he took stock of his life. And at what proved to be our final conversation, he suddenly asked me, "What's all this spirituality stuff anyway?" I was surprised. I was especially surprised because I lost a page of my manuscript here. It's very surprising. But I was surprised to hear this because I knew Burt to be a strong rationalist humanist. So I didn't expect this explicitly theological question, but I answered him much as I've said today, that breath and wind and spirit is a manifestation of breath and wind in the ways that I've described. And he listened to it, and he seemed deeply satisfied, and he took a deep breath and he just let it go. And the thing is, Burt in his teaching career was a specialist in the woodwinds, kind of like the oboe that we heard at the offertory. That was his special field. So, and he also had collected kites and flew kites at his memorial service sometime later on the ceiling. It was a higher ceiling than this, but there were dozens of kites, his kites, hanging suspended from the ceiling at about this level. It was absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, colorful scene. And he often would just sit on his back porch watching the rainbow-colored windsock fluttering in the breeze, and that's what we were doing on that day. So not long after that, he breathed his last breath. He expired. His breath was taken up into that, what the Navajo called the Nilche, that great wind, of which the Nilche Wisizani, the part that is ours, it was given back to the Nilche that surrounds us. So at death, we expire literally into that larger respiration process of the earth. But throughout our lives, we are immersed in it. We're a part of it. We're connected through it to each other and to all other living beings at the most primal level possible. I'm reminded in all of this, and this just came to me this morning, of the lovely way that the Irish poet John O'Donoghue used to pronounce the word earth, E-A-R-T-H, with his Irish accent. He said, earth, we live, he's a blessing for the earth. And I always thought, well, that would be spelled A-I-R-T-H. And the image that I had was that even as we stand on the earth, we live in the earth. We live within its systems. We are immersed in it, and we certainly are immersed in this atmosphere. One of our songs says, we are the earth, upright and proud, in us the earth is knowing. Its winds are music in our mouths. Its winds are music in our mouths. That's how we participate in this milche. We're spiritual amphibians, you might say. We live on the ground, and yet we swim in this sea of spirit. It's never too late to learn, and it's never too soon to pray. But in all of that, remember to breathe. And on your journey, on your spiritual journey, on your spiritual quest or adventure, just make sure that you always keep walking in the direction from which the wind is blowing. Amen.